Okay, so we are continuing with Chapter 8, Arrays, and we talked about basic arrays in our previous video. In this case, we are still talking about basic arrays, but we talked about integer arrays. Now we're going to talk about character arrays. So character array, if you know, so character arrays can be declared the same way as you declare an integer array, but with the char data type. So I have a character array called name that can take 101 characters. And we have the prompt. And to read a character array, unlike an integer array where you go through a for loop, you can read an aggregate data type, which means you can read the array as a whole. So we use cin.get. Now there are different versions of cin.get. In this case, we use the two-parameter version. The first parameter is the name of the variable, and the second parameter is the number of characters you want to read, which happens to be 101. And once we read it, the name that they enter goes into this variable name, and you output it. Again, you can do aggregate output, unlike integer arrays where you go through a for loop and you have to manipulate one item at a time. Whereas in a character array, you can output it all at one time. So we're not going through a character array. So, or we're not going through a for loop. So if you build this and run, and it says enter a name, and here's the other reason for using cin.get. I can enter my name with a space and it should be able to read it. We don't want to be able to just read only one word. We want to be able to read text with spaces. Now, one thing you could do is come here on the top outside main and do our global constants. I always like to do that, and say const int max char equals 101. So make your number of characters for your array a constant. So we use that wherever we need to, rather than having to type in the number 101, and if it changes, then you change in one place and you change it, and you don't have to change it in 5 different places. So everywhere you can use maxchar. Now also remember that even though your number of characters is 101, the user can enter only 100 characters. That last one character is reserved for the null character, which it automatically puts in. So if you want to be specific, you can say enter your name less than or about 100 characters. Just say 100 characters, so the user knows they can enter up to 100 characters and no more than that. Then let's build that. Nothing should change except for the fact that we've used a constant, which really doesn't change the output of our program. Now, if you type in more than 100 characters, it is going to simply stop at 100 characters. It is not going to take any more. So that's character arrays. Now I'm going to exclude this. Before I exclude it, I'm going to copy some stuff here, some comments that I can use. Okay, so we exclude this, and I'm going to add another program here to see how to find the largest element in an array. So now we know how to read elements into an array, whether it's a character array or an integer array. Now we're going to see how to, so let's say this program demos basic arrays. It shows how to find the largest element in an array. So you want to, your array is not sorted, you're going to go through the array and you're going to find the largest element in the array. So let's see what we have here. I do have a constant called cap equals 10 for my array. Here's my array called list, initialized to 0, and I have two integer variables I and max, both initialized to 0. So max is going to hold the maximum number or the index that I'm going to find as I go through. So I ask the user to enter 10 whole numbers. I read it using a for loop. Then we output it to the user. This is echoing the input. We output the user saying you entered, this is your number list. Then we go down here and we say, okay, let's find the largest. How do you find the largest? we essentially have to go through and compare every single number to one another and find the largest. So let's say we start with the first number and say that is the largest number. And we compare that with the second number. If the first number is greater than the second number, then the first number still remains the largest, and you store it in a variable, which is our max. So if you notice, I said max equals list of 0. So my assumption is list of 0, which is the first element, is max. Then I start comparing. Notice my for loop starts at 1 this time, because there is no point in comparing the number to itself. If I start at 0, I'll be comparing list of 0 to list of 0. So we want to start at 1, and I compare if list of I, which is my second number, happens to be greater than max, which is my number that I have stored right now, which is my first number, then of course max is now going to switch. It is going to become the second number. If that is not the case, then max remains at whatever it was, which is the first number. And then the I gets incremented to the next one. So now we are comparing the first number or the second number with the third number, whichever one happens to be the max. And if you keep going this way, at the end of your loop, max will contain the largest number in your list, and then we output it. So let's build it and run it. So let's enter the whole number separated by a space, or you can hit enter either way. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And here's your list of numbers, and of course it says largest equals the last number, which is 1234. So try a couple of different things. Now that you know how to find the largest number, try to take the same algorithm, change it a little bit, and try to find the smallest number. These are the ways in which you can come up with your own programs. Is when you start writing programs based on existing programs, change it a little bit and try to write a different algorithm, then you get better at it. Okay, so now I'm going to exclude this program, and I'm going to add one more. In this case, we are going to see how to pass arrays to functions. So it's the same largest program, but this time the largest is done using functions. So if you take a look at it, finds the largest element in the array using functions. Now, you know how parameters are passed to functions. They're passed by value or by reference. By value is where the data is copied. By reference is where the data is passed by passing its address, and so we are referring to the original value. Arrays by default are passed by reference because they can be large, they can have large amounts of data, so we are not allowed to pass arrays by value. They just get passed by default by reference. So let's take a look at the syntax of how we do this. We still have our constant. Here is my function prototype. Notice it returns an integer, which is the largest integer. The function is called largest. It takes one parameter, which is my array, and notice the syntax of that. The data type of the array followed by the name of the array followed by square brackets with no number inside of it. It does not need to know because it is referring to main for the array, and in main we know how many elements we have and we know when to stop. Again, remember, the program does not really, all it needs to know the number is to allocate the memory. Once the memory is allocated, then you are responsible for navigating through the array and do not go over your bounds of the array. So part of the program is very similar to the previous program. Here's where you read from user into the list and we print it to make sure that it's right, or let them know. We echo the input. And I also have another statement here where, if you notice, I print the address of the array elements. And how do we do that? We go through the same array and we say the name of the array is nothing but the address of the array. And every time I add it increments to the next address. So just look at that, see if you can figure that out. Then we output the elements of the array. Then I call my largest function and pass. Notice how we pass the parameter. Again, it's the same as anything else, just the name of the variable is all you need to do. And Then we go into a function. Notice here's my function heading. Notice how we don't have the ampersand sign. Very important for the array. If you put the ampersand sign in for the array, even though it is being passed by reference, it is a syntactical error. So you don't get to put the ampersand sign in your function prototype or in your function heading. So then you go in here and notice again my function is very similar. Max equals list of 0, initialize max to the first element, go through the array, do the comparison just like we did before. When we are done, max will have the largest number, and we return that max to where it was called from, in this case main. And once we come back, the return number gets put into max here in main, and it gets output. So the things you need to take note of in this is how to pass arrays to functions. They are passed by reference. You do not have to put the ampersand sign. You do have to put the square bracket. You do not put the number inside the square bracket in the prototype or in the heading. And everything else is the same. But remember, you are changing the original array. If you're changing anything, you are taking data from the original array. And let's run this first, and then we'll talk more about the address of these array elements. So enter 10 whole numbers, we enter some numbers. So again, the same program. Notice my 10 addresses that I have here. They are all beginning with the same letters and numbers. It's hexadecimal, except that the last couple of digits changes because we go from 3C, and if you add 4 bytes to it, it's 40, and so on and so forth. So we are essentially jumping 4 bytes because we are storing a list of integers. And there's my list, and there's my largest number. So if you go back to the statement where we are printing the array, notice we said list plus I. Initially I is 0. So it'll be simply list plus 0, which is list, which is the address of that first element. So the name of the array stands for the base address, or the address of the first element of the array. It's something that you really need to understand if you're going to do further programming. And then when I add the next time I becomes 1, list plus 1 doesn't increment it by 1, but the address actually gets incremented by the number of bytes of the data it's storing. So since it's storing an integer, it's going to jump up 4 bytes. So it goes to the next address, and so on and so forth until it's done printing. So that's arrays and functions. Please make sure you write some programs so you actually understand the concept.